Welcome, time travelers. Ever dreamt of stepping back in time, of witnessing the grandeur of medieval castles, the clash of steel on steel in a knightly tournament? Perhaps you envision a romantic era of chivalry and courtly love, a world straight out of a fairy tale. And while those elements existed, they represent only a sliver of the reality. The medieval period, spanning roughly from the 5th to the 15th century, was a complex and brutal tapestry woven from threads of war, famine, disease, and superstition. Forget the romanticized Hollywood portrayal. This isn't a whimsical trip to a Renaissance fair. This is a journey into a world where survival wasn't guaranteed, and a single misstep could lead to a very unpleasant and potentially fatal end. This video is your survival guide, your passport to navigating the treacherous landscape of the Middle Ages without ending up as a charred offering on a bonfire. We're not just talking about avoiding the obvious perils, like bandits and warring armies. The real dangers are often far subtler, far more insidious. Misunderstanding social customs, failing to grasp the intricacies of medieval law, or even a simple case of mistaken identity could land you in a situation far worse than a simple brawl. We're going to shatter the myths and misconceptions perpetuated by popular culture. The Middle Ages weren't a monolithic era. They were a collection of distinct periods and regions, each with its own unique challenges and customs. What was considered acceptable behavior in one kingdom could be a capital offense in another. The very notion of a typical medieval person is a dangerous oversimplification. Peasant life was vastly different from the life of a noble, and the experiences of a woman differed drastically from those of a man. Imagine attempting to navigate this complex world armed only with your 21st century worldview. You'd be as out of place as a spaceship in a farmer's field. The language barrier alone could be insurmountable. While English, French, and German existed in rudimentary forms, they were vastly different from their modern counterparts. Latin, the language of the church and the educated elite, was essential for communication in many contexts. A simple misunderstanding, a misplaced word, a misinterpreted gesture could have dire consequences. Imagine accusing someone of heresy without realizing the gravity of the accusation in a society where religious faith was the bedrock of existence. The physical environment itself presented constant threats. Hygiene standards were rudimentary at best. Disease was rampant, spreading through crowded towns and unsanitary living conditions. Malnutrition was a common occurrence, leading to weakened immune systems and increased vulnerability to illness. Clean water was a precious commodity, and even seemingly harmless food could carry deadly pathogens. Simple cuts and scrapes, easily treated in the modern world, could become life-threatening infections in the Middle Ages. The lack of advanced medical knowledge meant that even minor ailments could swiftly escalate into fatal conditions. The justice system, if you could even call it that, was often arbitrary and brutal. Accusations were easily made, and evidence was often flimsy or non-existent. Trial by ordeal, combat, or even torture were common practices. Your understanding of modern legal concepts would be of little use in a world governed by religious dogma, feudal obligations, and local customs that often superseded any semblance of formal law. So, before you embark on your time-traveling adventure, prepare yourself for a world vastly different from your own. This isn't a game. It's a journey into a harsh, unforgiving, yet undeniably fascinating era. This video will equip you with the knowledge and strategies you need to survive and, hopefully, thrive in the medieval world. We'll cover everything from appropriate clothing and essential language skills to understanding the social hierarchy, navigating the legal system, and avoiding the ever-present threat of accusations of witchcraft or heresy. We'll explore the daily routines, the food, the beliefs, and the dangers of this pivotal period in human history. Get ready to learn the rules of survival in a time when the stakes were literally life or death. Because in the Middle Ages, one wrong move could be your last. Alright, time travelers, let's get one thing straight. Forget everything you think you know about the Middle Ages from Hollywood. Those sweeping epics, those chivalrous knights, those damsels in distress, they're a romanticized, heavily sanitized version of a far more complex and brutal reality. We're not saying knights didn't exist. or that there wasn't courtly love, but those elements represent a tiny fraction of the overall picture. The medieval period, stretching roughly from the 5th to the 15th centuries, wasn't a unified, homogeneous era. It was a patchwork quilt of kingdoms, cultures, and social structures, each with its own unique challenges and customs. Generalizing about the medieval experience is like generalizing about the modern experience. It's simply too vast and varied. Think of it this way. Imagine trying to understand the entire 20th century by watching only gangster films and wartime documentaries. You'd miss the technological advancements, the social revolutions, the artistic movements, the everyday lives of ordinary people. Similarly, focusing solely on the romanticized aspects of the Middle Ages obscures the harsh realities that shaped the lives of millions. The first thing you need to grasp is the sheer brutality of medieval life. Warfare was constant, often brutal and devastating. Sieges could last for months, leaving entire populations starving and vulnerable to disease. Armies were not always well-disciplined. Looting, rape, and pillage were common occurrences. The battlefield was a horrific place, and even victory often came at a terrible cost. Casualties were staggering, and the aftermath of battles often involved widespread suffering and displacement. Beyond the battlefield, life was far from idyllic. Famine was a recurring threat, particularly in years of poor harvests. Malnutrition was widespread, leading to weakened immune systems and increased vulnerability to disease. Epidemics, such as the bubonic plague, could decimate entire populations, leaving behind widespread death and despair. Basic sanitation was almost non-existent in many areas, contributing to the spread of disease and creating unsanitary living conditions. Imagine living in a world where clean water was a luxury, where the stench of rotting refuse was a constant companion, and where death was a frequent visitor to your community. The social hierarchy was incredibly rigid, with power concentrated in the hands of a small elite. Peasants, who made up the vast majority of the population, lived lives of backbreaking labor, often struggling to survive on meager rations. Their lives were governed by the whims of their landlords, and they had little or no legal recourse against oppression or injustice. Women, regardless of social class, faced significant limitations on their rights and opportunities. Their roles were primarily confined to domestic duties and childrearing, and they had limited access to education or political power. The justice system, such as it was often arbitrary and brutal. Trial by ordeal, combat, or even torture were common practices, with the outcome often determined by superstition or the influence of powerful individuals. Accusations of witchcraft or heresy could lead to horrific punishments, including burning at the stake. The concept of due process, as we understand it today, was largely absent from the medieval world. Religion played a dominant role in medieval life, shaping everything from social structures and political systems to individual beliefs and practices. The Church held immense power and influence, and its teachings permeated every aspect of society. However, religious beliefs were often intertwined with superstition and fear, leading to widespread persecution of those deemed heretical or unorthodox. The very notion of religious tolerance, as we understand it today, was largely alien to the medieval world. The economy was primarily agrarian, with most people engaged in agricultural labor. Trade existed, but it was often hampered by poor infrastructure, banditry, and political instability. Technological advancements were slow and incremental, and the pace of life was generally slower than what we are accustomed to today. Communication was limited, and travel was arduous and time-consuming. News traveled slowly, and information was often unreliable or biased. So, as you prepare for your journey to the Middle Ages, remember this: it wasn't a time of romantic chivalry and fairy tale endings. It was a time of hardship, brutality, and constant struggle for survival. It was a time of incredible complexity, where seemingly minor actions could have unforeseen and potentially devastating consequences. Understanding this harsh reality is the first step towards navigating the medieval world safely and successfully. Don't let the Hollywood glamour blind you to the very real dangers that awaited those who lived and died in this fascinating yet unforgiving era. We'll be covering the specifics of survival in the following segments, but remember, accurate expectations are the foundation of a successful time travel adventure. All right, time travelers, we've established that the Middle Ages weren't exactly a walk in the park. We've debunked the Hollywood myths, and now we're tackling a crucial element of survival: communication. Forget the universal translator. That's pure science fiction. In the medieval world, language is your lifeline, and a lack of it could be your death sentence. Think about it. You're suddenly transported to a time and place where the language spoken is vastly different from anything you've ever encountered. Even if you think you know a little bit of, say, Old English, it's likely not going to cut it. Languages evolve, and the English spoken in 13th century England is significantly different from modern English. This is true for all languages of the time. The nuances, the idioms, the very sounds, they're all going to be alien to your 21st century ears. So, how do you overcome this monumental communication barrier? Well, the short answer is learn the language. And I mean really learn it. We're not talking about a few phrases picked up from a tourist phrasebook. We're talking about a level of fluency that allows you to navigate complex social situations, understand legal proceedings, and negotiate your way out of potentially dangerous encounters. This requires significant preparation and dedicated study. The first decision you need to make is what language to learn. This depends entirely on your target region and time period. There wasn't a single, unified language across the entire medieval world. Instead, you had a patchwork of regional dialects and languages, constantly evolving and changing. If you're planning a trip to 12th century France, for example, you'll need to learn Old French, a very different beast from modern French. Similarly, if your destination is 14th century England, you'll need to grapple with Middle English, a language that will challenge even the most seasoned linguist. And let's not forget the numerous other languages spoken across Europe and beyond. Germanic languages, Slavic languages, Romance languages, all existed in their medieval forms, often quite different from their modern counterparts. However, there's one language that transcends regional boundaries and holds a special significance in the medieval world: Latin. Latin was the lingua franca of the medieval period, the language of the church, of scholarship, and of international diplomacy. While not spoken fluently by the vast majority of the population, it was the language of official documents, religious texts, and scholarly discourse. Knowing Latin will give you a significant advantage, allowing you to decipher inscriptions, understand official pronouncements, and communicate with educated individuals. It's not going to be enough on its own, of course. You'll still need to learn the local vernacular to interact with the common people. But having a grasp of Latin will significantly enhance your ability to navigate the medieval world. But learning a medieval language isn't just about vocabulary and grammar. It's also about understanding the cultural context in which the language is used. A simple misunderstanding, a misplaced word, a misinterpreted gesture, these could have potentially fatal consequences. Imagine accusing someone of heresy without fully understanding the theological nuances of the accusation. Or imagine offending a powerful nobleman by using the wrong form of address. In a society where social hierarchies are rigidly defined and where religious beliefs are deeply ingrained, a linguistic blunder could lead to serious repercussions. So, how do you go about learning these languages? Well, thankfully, we live in the age of the internet. There are numerous resources available online, from language learning apps to digitized medieval texts. You can find dictionaries, grammars, and even online courses dedicated to medieval languages. However, it's important to remember that learning these languages requires dedication and patience. It won't happen overnight. You'll need to commit to regular study, and you'll need to be prepared for a significant learning curve. But the effort will be worth it. Imagine the possibilities. You can engage in meaningful conversations with medieval people, understand their stories, and learn about their lives. You can access information and resources that would otherwise be unavailable to you. You can navigate complex social situations with confidence and avoid potentially dangerous misunderstandings. And most importantly, you can significantly increase your chances of survival. In the medieval world, language isn't just a means of communication, it's a tool for survival, a key to unlocking the secrets of a fascinating and often perilous era. Don't underestimate its importance. Invest the time, effort, and resources into mastering at least the basics of the language of your chosen destination. And remember, a little bit of linguistic preparation can go a long way towards keeping you safe and sound. It could even be the difference between a successful time travel adventure and a very early and very unfortunate return. So, start studying, time travelers. Your life may depend on it. All right, time travelers, we've covered language, and now we're tackling a crucial aspect of your medieval survival strategy: clothing. Forget your sleek, futuristic threads. Rocking up in anything remotely resembling 21st century attire is a one-way ticket to serious trouble. You'll be instantly identified as an outsider, a potential threat, possibly even a heretic or worse. Blending in is paramount, and that starts with your wardrobe. This isn't about fashion. This is about survival. Think about it. Imagine a medieval peasant seeing someone emerge from a shimmering portal, clad in materials they've never seen before, adorned with technology they can't comprehend. Fear, suspicion, and possibly outright hostility would be the immediate reactions. In a world where superstition and fear were rampant, anything unfamiliar could be interpreted as demonic or supernatural, leading to accusations of witchcraft or heresy, neither of which carries a pleasant outcome. So, forget the sci-fi fantasies. Your goal is to look like you belong, to appear as though you've always been a part of that specific time and place. This means understanding the nuances of medieval clothing, which varied significantly depending on factors like social class, geographic location, and time period. There's no single medieval outfit you can simply put on and blend seamlessly. Let's start with the basics. The foundation of medieval clothing was linen, wool, and leather. Forget about synthetic fabrics. They didn't exist. Linen was primarily used for undergarments and lighter clothing, while wool was the staple material for outer garments, offering warmth and protection from the elements. Leather was used for shoes, belts, and occasionally for more durable outer garments, especially among working classes. The colors were generally muted earth tones, browns, grays, greens, and blues, although brighter colors were sometimes used for special occasions or by the wealthy. Social class played a significant role in determining appropriate attire. Peasants wore simple, functional clothing made from coarse materials. Their garments were typically practical and durable, designed to withstand the rigors of daily labor. Think simple tunics, sturdy trousers, and rough-spun cloaks. Women would often wear long, loose-fitting dresses, practical for both work and child-rearing. Moving up the social ladder, the clothing becomes more elaborate and refined. The upper classes, nobles, and clergy wore finer fabrics like silk and velvet, often richly embroidered or adorned with precious metals. Their clothing was designed to display their wealth and status, with intricate cuts, embellishments, and details that signified their social rank. The cuts and styles of their clothing often reflected the latest fashions of their time and region. These could vary significantly, so researching the specific styles of the time period and region you're visiting is crucial. For men, consider tunics of varying lengths, often worn over hose, similar to tights. A cloak would be essential for warmth and protection, and a belt would be necessary to secure the tunic and carry tools or weapons. Shoes would range from simple leather sandals to sturdy boots, depending on the occupation and weather. Hats were also common, varying in style and material based on social standing. For women, long dresses were the norm, often with sleeves that could vary in length and style. Aprons were commonly worn for protection during work. Head coverings were essential, with styles ranging from simple veils to more elaborate headdresses, again, depending on social standing. Elaborate jewelry, if you have access to it, could further enhance your appearance, but keep it subtle and avoid anything that looks too modern. Now, let's talk about accessories. Avoid anything overtly modern. Watches, phones, jewelry with modern designs. These will all scream outsider. Instead, opt for simple, period-appropriate accessories. A simple leather belt, a wooden comb, a small pouch for carrying essential items. These would all be suitable choices. Remember, the goal is to blend in, not to stand out. In addition to the clothing itself, consider your grooming. Long hair for men was common, often tied back or braided. Women often wore their hair long, sometimes styled in braids or buns. Facial hair would also be common for men, though the style would vary depending on the era and region. Remember that personal hygiene standards were far different in the medieval period than they are now. While you should maintain cleanliness as much as possible, avoiding anything that looks too modern is important to avoid unwanted attention. Remember, this isn't a costume party. This is about survival. Thorough research into the specific clothing styles of your target region and time period is absolutely essential. Use historical illustrations, paintings, and archaeological findings to guide your choices. The more accurately you can replicate the clothing of the time, the less likely you are to attract unwanted attention. Remember, one wrong move could lead to accusations of heresy, witchcraft, or even being branded a spy. The consequences could be severe, so meticulous planning and attention to detail are crucial. Take your time, research carefully, and remember, your clothing is your first line of defense in the medieval world. It's the difference between blending seamlessly into the background or becoming a target. Dress accordingly, time travelers. Your life may depend on it. All right, time travelers, let's talk about something that's crucial to your survival in the medieval ages, but not often discussed in glamorous historical dramas: hygiene. Forget everything you know about modern sanitation. The medieval world was a breeding ground for disease, and understanding this harsh reality is essential if you want to avoid a premature and unpleasant end to your time-traveling adventure. We're not talking about a little bit of dirt under your fingernails. We're talking about a world where disease was rampant, where even minor injuries could become life-threatening infections, and where the very air you breathed could be hazardous to your health. The first thing you need to understand is the lack of basic sanitation. Forget indoor plumbing, running water, and sewage systems. These were luxuries almost entirely absent from the medieval world, especially for the vast majority of the population. Towns and cities were often overcrowded, with streets serving as open sewers. Human waste, animal dung, and rotting refuse accumulated in the streets and alleys, creating a breeding ground for disease-carrying insects and rodents. The stench alone would be overwhelming to a modern nose, but the real danger lay in the invisible pathogens lurking in the filth. Water sources were frequently contaminated, leading to the spread of waterborne diseases like cholera and typhoid. Rivers and streams, often the only sources of water for many communities, were used for drinking, washing, and disposing of waste, creating a vicious cycle of contamination. Wells, while a seemingly cleaner option, were often poorly constructed and susceptible to contamination from surface runoff. The lack of understanding about germ theory meant that the connection between unsanitary conditions and disease was largely unknown, making it difficult to implement effective preventative measures. Personal hygiene practices were rudimentary at best. Soap was a luxury, and even when available, it was often of poor quality and not very effective. Regular bathing was not a common practice for many, and the concept of personal cleanliness was vastly different from modern standards. Clothing was often worn for extended periods without being washed, accumulating dirt, sweat, and potentially disease-carrying parasites. Hair was often long and unkempt, providing another haven for lice and other pests. The prevalence of disease was staggering. Common illnesses like dysentery, influenza, and pneumonia were widespread, often leading to death, particularly among the young and the elderly. More devastating were the periodic outbreaks of major epidemics, like the bubonic plague, which could decimate entire communities. The lack of effective medical treatments meant that once an epidemic took hold, there was little that could be done to stop its spread. The death rate was extremely high, and survival often depended on luck and a strong immune system. So, how can you protect yourself in this disease-ridden environment? The first step is to understand the risks and take proactive measures to minimize your exposure to pathogens. This involves a multi-pronged approach, focusing on personal hygiene, safe food and water practices, and avoiding overcrowded and unsanitary areas. Let's start with personal hygiene. While daily bathing might not be practical in all circumstances, regular hand washing is absolutely essential. Find a clean water source, if possible, and wash your hands frequently, especially before eating or after using the privy. Keep your hair clean and tied back, and check for lice regularly. Change your clothes frequently, and if possible, wash or at least air them out regularly. While soap might be a luxury, you can make your own from readily available ingredients such as ashes and plant oils. It won't be as effective as modern soap, but it's better than nothing. Next, pay close attention to food and water safety. Avoid eating anything that looks or smells questionable. Cook your food thoroughly, and avoid consuming raw or undercooked meat or fish. If possible, boil your water before drinking it. If you can't boil it, at least let it stand for a while to allow any sediment to settle. Avoid drinking from stagnant water sources, and try to find a clean spring or well if possible. Finally, try to avoid overcrowded and unsanitary areas. If you have a choice, stay away from densely populated towns and cities, especially during periods of epidemic outbreaks. Look for more sparsely populated areas, where the risk of infection is lower. If you do find yourself in a crowded area, try to keep your distance from others, especially if they appear to be ill. In addition to these preventative measures, you should also be aware of the signs and symptoms of common medieval diseases. Learn to recognize the symptoms of illnesses like dysentery, typhoid, and the plague, so you can seek medical attention or take appropriate precautions if you become ill. While medieval medical practices were far from perfect, some remedies did exist, and seeking help from a physician or healer might improve your chances of survival. Remember, in the medieval world, hygiene wasn't just about cleanliness, it was about survival. By taking proactive measures to protect yourself from disease, you can significantly increase your chances of surviving your time travel adventure. This isn't about achieving modern standards of cleanliness. It's about mitigating the risks as much as possible in a world where disease was a constant and ever-present threat. So, be vigilant, be prepared, and remember that your health is your most valuable asset in the medieval ages. Neglecting your hygiene could be a fatal mistake. Stay clean, stay safe, and good luck, time travelers. All right, time travelers, let's talk about sustenance, or rather, the lack thereof in the medieval ages. Forget your carefully curated grocery lists and restaurant reservations. Medieval food was a far cry from the culinary delights of the 21st century. Prepare for a diet drastically different from your own, one that might challenge even the most adventurous palate. And remember, the old adage, when in Rome, doesn't apply when Rome is a disease-ridden village in 14th century Europe. First, let's shatter some myths. The notion of constant feasting and lavish banquets, as often depicted in Hollywood, was a reality only for the extremely wealthy elite. For the vast majority of the population, peasants, laborers, and the urban poor, food was scarce, monotonous, and often barely enough to sustain life. Forget Michelin stars. Survival was the culinary goal. The staples of the medieval diet vary depending on geography and season, but some common threads emerge. Bread, often made from rye or barley, formed the cornerstone of most meals. It was a simple, filling food, easily produced, and a reliable source of carbohydrates. However, the quality of the bread varied greatly. The wealthy enjoyed fine white bread made from wheat flour, while the poor often ate coarse, dark bread made from less refined grains, sometimes even containing chaff and other impurities. This could lead to digestive issues and nutritional deficiencies. Meat was a luxury, consumed only occasionally by most people. Poultry, pork, and beef were the most common meats, but game animals like venison and rabbit were also hunted, especially by the peasantry. However, meat was often preserved through salting, smoking, or pickling, which gave it a strong, sometimes unpleasant taste. Fresh meat was a rare treat, and spoiled meat was a common cause of illness. Vegetables played a more significant role in the medieval diet than is often realized. Leafy greens, root vegetables like turnips and carrots, and legumes like beans and peas were commonly grown and consumed. However, the availability of fresh vegetables was seasonal, and preservation techniques were limited. Pickling and drying were common methods of preserving vegetables for the winter months. Dairy products were also a staple, particularly in regions where livestock farming was prevalent. Cheese, milk, and butter were common foods, though their quality and availability varied widely. Cheese was often a hard, salty cheese, sometimes quite strong in flavor. Milk was often consumed fresh, but it could also be used to make butter and cheese. Fruits were readily available in season, providing a welcome source of sweetness and vitamins. Apples, pears, berries, and cherries were common fruits, often eaten fresh, dried, or made into jams and jellies. However, the availability of fruit was also seasonal and preservation techniques were limited. Now, let's talk about what you absolutely need to avoid. The most important rule of medieval dining is this: if it looks questionable, don't eat it. Food safety standards were rudimentary at best. Spoiled meat, contaminated water, and improperly stored food were common causes of illness and death. Don't rely on your modern senses. The appearance and smell of food might not always be accurate indicators of its safety. Avoid raw or undercooked meat and fish. Cook your food thoroughly to kill any potential pathogens. Be wary of food that has been left out in the open for extended periods. Avoid eating food that has a strange smell, color, or texture. And absolutely avoid anything that looks or smells even slightly off. Trust your instincts and err on the side of caution. Water safety is equally important. Avoid drinking from stagnant water sources. If possible, boil your water before drinking it to kill any bacteria or parasites. If boiling isn't an option, at least let the water stand for a while to allow any sediment to settle. Consider using a water filter or purification tablets if you have access to them. Remember, contaminated water is a major cause of disease in the medieval world. Regarding drinks, beer and ale were the most common beverages, even for children. These were safer than water, as the brewing process killed many harmful bacteria. Wine was also consumed, but it was a luxury affordable only by the wealthy. Avoid drinking directly from streams or rivers. It is a recipe for disaster. Finally, remember that dining etiquette in the medieval period was vastly different from modern customs. Table manners were generally less refined, and communal eating was common, especially among the peasantry. Don't be surprised if you find yourself sharing food from a single dish or using your fingers to eat. Observe the customs of those around you and try to adapt to their practices. Remember, blending in is key to survival. A simple cultural faux pas might seem trivial to you, but it could have unexpected consequences in a society governed by rigid social hierarchies and deeply ingrained traditions. Understanding the medieval diet is not just about satisfying your hunger, it's about avoiding illness and death. The food you choose to eat and the water you choose to drink could be the difference between a successful time travel adventure and a very unpleasant end. So, be cautious, be discerning, and above all, be aware of the very real dangers lurking in every bite you take. Your survival depends on it. Now, let's move on to the next critical aspect of surviving the Middle Ages. All right, time travelers, we've covered the basics of survival: language, clothing, hygiene, and food, but now we delve into something far more nuanced and potentially perilous: medieval social etiquette. Forget your modern notions of egalitarianism. Medieval society was rigidly hierarchical, a complex web of social strata where knowing your place and demonstrating appropriate respect wasn't just polite, it was non-negotiable. A single misstep, a misplaced word, a gesture out of line with your perceived social standing could have serious, even fatal, consequences. This wasn't a society governed by abstract laws. It was a society governed by deeply ingrained customs and expectations. The medieval social hierarchy was primarily feudal, built upon a pyramid of power with a king or monarch at its apex. Below the king came the nobility: dukes, earls, barons, and knights, each with their own lands, titles, and responsibilities. These nobles held vast power and influence, controlling land, resources, and the lives of the peasants who worked their estates. Their word was often law, and their displeasure could be devastating. Beneath the nobility lay the peasantry, the vast majority of the population. They were the farmers, laborers, artisans, and servants who worked the land and sustained the rest of society. They were largely powerless, subject to the whims of their landlords, and their lives were governed by the rhythms of the agricultural year. Within the peasantry, there were further divisions based on wealth, occupation, and social standing. Some peasants owned small plots of land, while others were landless laborers working for wages. Then there was the church, a powerful institution that held significant influence over all aspects of medieval life. Clergy members, from humble parish priests to powerful archbishops, occupied a distinct position in the social hierarchy, wielding both spiritual and temporal power. Their social standing depended on their position within the church hierarchy, with the higher-ranking clergy often enjoying considerable wealth and prestige. Navigating this complex social landscape required a keen understanding of social customs and appropriate behavior. The rules of etiquette vary depending on social standing, location, and specific circumstances. A simple mistake, such as addressing a nobleman improperly, could be interpreted as a grave insult, with potentially dire consequences. One of the most important aspects of medieval etiquette was demonstrating appropriate deference to those of higher social standing. This involved using the correct forms of address, bowing or curtsying appropriately, and avoiding any behavior that could be interpreted as disrespectful or challenging. Failing to do so could lead to accusations of insolence or rebellion, both of which could result in severe punishment. Forms of address were crucial. Knowing whether to use Sir, My Lord, Your Grace, or some other title, and using it correctly, was essential. Improper addressing was a serious social blunder that could offend even the most patient individual. Even the way you spoke, your tone of voice, and your body language could convey deference or disrespect, so paying attention to these nuances was crucial. Physical contact was also subject to strict rules of etiquette. Touching someone of higher social standing without permission was considered highly inappropriate and could be seen as an act of aggression. Similarly, certain gestures, such as pointing or making certain facial expressions, could be interpreted as insults. Understanding these unspoken rules was as important as understanding the spoken ones. Gifts and hospitality also played a significant role in medieval social interactions. Offering gifts to those of higher social standing was a way of demonstrating respect and seeking favor. Hospitality was also an important aspect of social life, with nobles often hosting feasts and gatherings to entertain their guests and reinforce social bonds. Reciprocity was essential. Accepting hospitality obligated you to return the favor in the future, often in kind. However, understanding social etiquette wasn't just about avoiding offense. It was also about gaining favor and establishing social connections. By behaving appropriately and demonstrating respect, you could build relationships with influential individuals, gaining access to resources and opportunities that would otherwise be unavailable. Remember, time travelers, this wasn't a society governed by abstract principles of equality. It was a society governed by power, influence, and deeply ingrained social hierarchies. Your survival in this world depends not only on understanding the physical dangers, but also on understanding the social dynamics and navigating them skillfully. Observe those around you, learn from their actions, and adapt your behavior accordingly. Remember, blending in is key, and a seemingly minor social blunder could have unforeseen and potentially devastating consequences. Respect the social order, time travelers, or risk facing the consequences. Your time travel adventure hinges on your ability to master the subtle art of medieval diplomacy, a game where a misplaced word or a careless gesture could be your last. So observe, learn, and adapt, and remember, the survival of your time travel depends on it. Alright, time travelers, let's talk religion. In the medieval world, religion wasn't just a personal belief, it was the very fabric of society, interwoven into every aspect of life. From daily routines to political structures, from legal systems to artistic expression. Understanding the dominant faith, Christianity, and its practices is absolutely crucial for your survival. Ignoring this aspect could lead to misunderstandings, accusations, and potentially fatal consequences. Forget the sanitized, romanticized view of religion often portrayed in popular culture. Medieval Christianity was a complex, multifaceted entity, far from the unified, homogeneous system we often imagine. Different sects, regional variations, and evolving interpretations of doctrine created a landscape of beliefs and practices that varied considerably across time and place. What was considered orthodox in one region might be heretical in another, and a single misstep in understanding these nuances could have dire repercussions. The Catholic Church was the dominant religious institution in most of Western Europe during the medieval period. Its power and influence permeated every level of society, from the royal court to the humblest village. The Church controlled vast amounts of land, wealth, and resources, and its clergy wielded significant political and social power. The Pope, as the head of the Church, was considered the supreme spiritual authority, and his pronouncements carried immense weight. Understanding the Church's structure and hierarchy is essential. The Church was organized into a complex system of dioceses, parishes, and monasteries, each with its own leadership and responsibilities. The clergy, from the Pope down to the local priests, played a pivotal role in medieval society, providing spiritual guidance, administering sacraments, and settling disputes. Their influence extended far beyond the realm of spirituality, influencing politics, education, and social life. The sacraments were central to Catholic practice. Baptism, confirmation, marriage, penance, anointing of the sick, holy orders, and the Eucharist were all considered essential rites of passage and spiritual nourishment. Understanding the significance of these sacraments and participating in them appropriately, if the opportunity arises, will demonstrate your adherence to the faith and avoid suspicion. However, remember that the rituals and practices surrounding the sacraments varied across time and region. Researching the specific customs of your destination is crucial. The Mass was the central act of Catholic worship. Attending Mass regularly was expected of all believers, and failure to do so could raise suspicion. The Mass involved a complex series of rituals and prayers, and understanding the basic structure and significance of the service is essential. While you might not fully grasp the theological nuances, demonstrating respect and participating appropriately will help you blend in and avoid unwanted attention. Remember, observing the rituals, even without full comprehension, is a sign of respect and adherence to the dominant faith. Religious beliefs were deeply ingrained in the daily lives of medieval people. Prayer was a constant feature of the day, with individuals and communities engaging in both public and private devotions. Religious festivals and holidays were celebrated with great enthusiasm, offering opportunities for community gatherings and religious observance. Understanding the significance of these festivals and participating appropriately, if possible, will demonstrate your understanding of the local culture and avoid suspicion. Observing holy days and abstaining from work on appropriate days will further demonstrate your respect for local customs. However, medieval Christianity was far from monolithic. Heresy, the belief or practice of doctrines contrary to established religious dogma, was a serious concern. The Church actively persecuted those deemed heretical, and accusations of heresy could lead to severe punishment, including imprisonment, torture, and even death. Understanding the Church's definition of heresy at the time and place you are visiting is crucial. Avoid expressing any beliefs or opinions that could be interpreted as heretical, even if they seem harmless or commonplace in your own time. Remember, religious intolerance was widespread, and even a slight deviation from established dogma could have grave consequences. Similarly, accusations of witchcraft were common and often resulted in brutal punishments. The belief in witchcraft and the power of evil spirits was widespread, and individuals accused of witchcraft often faced trial by ordeal, torture, or execution. Understanding the prevalent superstitions and beliefs surrounding witchcraft is crucial. Avoid any behavior or practice that could be interpreted as witchcraft, even if you don't believe in it. In a world governed by fear and superstition, appearances can be just as dangerous as reality. Beyond the Catholic Church, other religious groups existed, though often facing persecution or marginalization. Judaism and Islam had established communities in certain parts of Europe, but they often faced discrimination and restrictions. Understanding the presence of these other religious groups and the social dynamics surrounding them is important. Avoid any behavior that could be interpreted as disrespectful or insensitive towards these communities. Remember, religious tolerance was not a hallmark of the medieval world, and demonstrating sensitivity towards other faiths is crucial for your survival. Remember, time travelers, religion was not a separate sphere of life in the medieval world. It was deeply intertwined with every aspect of existence. Understanding this complex relationship is not just about religious knowledge, it's about survival. By demonstrating respect for the dominant faith and its practices, avoiding any behavior that could be interpreted as heretical or blasphemous, and displaying sensitivity towards other religious groups, you will significantly reduce the risk of attracting unwanted attention and increase your chances of surviving your time travel adventure. Ignorance of religious customs could be your downfall. Research thoroughly, observe carefully, and remember, your actions could speak louder than words in this world governed by faith and fear. Your survival depends on it. All right, time travelers, let's delve into a particularly thorny aspect of medieval life: law and order, or rather, the distinct lack thereof, as we understand it today. Forget your modern notions of due process, fair trials, and consistent application of the law. The medieval justice system was, to put it mildly, unique. It was a complex, often arbitrary, and frequently brutal system that varied wildly depending on location, social standing, and the whims of those in power. Understanding the system, or lack thereof, is crucial to your survival. Because while avoiding crime is ideal, knowing how to navigate the medieval legal landscape, even if you find yourself on the wrong side of the law, is essential. First, let's establish that the concept of a unified, nationwide legal code was largely absent from the medieval world. Instead, laws were a patchwork of local customs, feudal obligations, religious doctrines, and royal decrees. This meant that what constituted a crime in one region might be perfectly acceptable in another, and the penalties for the same offense could vary dramatically. A simple trespass on one lord's land might be a minor infraction, while a similar act on another's could lead to severe punishment. The influence of local lords and the church played a significant role in shaping the interpretation and enforcement of the law. The concept of innocent until proven guilty was largely absent. Accusations, especially those involving serious crimes, often held significant weight, and the burden of proving innocence often fell upon the accused. Evidence was often unreliable, based on hearsay, confessions obtained through torture, or trial by ordeal, methods we would now consider utterly barbaric and unreliable. Let's explore some common crimes and their punishments. Theft was a serious offense, with penalties ranging from fines and imprisonment to mutilation, branding, and even execution, depending on the value of the stolen goods and the social standing of both the thief and the victim. Murder, unsurprisingly, was a capital crime, though the definition of murder itself could be fluid, depending on the circumstances and the social status of those involved. A nobleman killing a peasant might face far less severe consequences than a peasant killing a nobleman. Assault and battery were also common crimes, with punishments ranging from fines to imprisonment to physical retribution. Depending on the severity of the assault, a victim might be allowed to exact revenge, leading to further violence and escalation. The crimes against the church were particularly serious. Heresy, the denial of established religious doctrines, was a capital offense, often resulting in brutal punishments, including burning at the stake. Blasphemy, sacrilege, and other offenses against religious authority carried similarly harsh penalties. Accusations of witchcraft, fueled by widespread superstition and fear, could also lead to horrific punishments, often involving torture and execution. The church wielded significant power over the legal system, and its influence was often decisive in determining the fate of those accused of religious crimes. Treason, or any act considered disloyal to the king or the ruling power, was another capital offense, often involving gruesome punishments designed to serve as a public example. The methods of execution for treason could be particularly brutal, reflecting the gravity of the crime and the power of the monarchy. Rebellion against feudal lords or the king carried similar consequences. Even minor acts of defiance could be met with harsh penalties, especially if they were perceived as challenging the existing social order. The legal process itself was often opaque and arbitrary. There was little in the way of formal legal representation, and the accused often faced trial without the benefit of legal counsel or a fair hearing. Trial by ordeal, a practice rooted in superstition and religious belief, was common in many parts of Europe. This involved subjecting the accused to dangerous ordeals, such as walking on hot coals or plunging their hands into boiling water. Survival was considered evidence of innocence, while failure was interpreted as guilt. Combat, or trial by battle, was another method used to determine guilt or innocence, particularly in disputes between nobles. The victor was considered to have been favored by God, and thus declared innocent. Torture was frequently employed to extract confessions, regardless of the accused's actual guilt. The use of torture was widespread, and its methods varied, from physical beatings to more sophisticated instruments designed to inflict excruciating pain. Confessions obtained through torture were often accepted as evidence, even if they were later retracted. Imprisonment, while a form of punishment, varied greatly in its conditions. Prisons were often overcrowded, unsanitary, and disease-ridden, making imprisonment a dangerous and often deadly experience. Those imprisoned often faced starvation, disease, and abuse. The conditions of imprisonment varied greatly depending on the social status of the prisoner and the whims of those who held them captive. So, how can you, a time traveler, navigate this chaotic legal landscape? The best strategy is prevention. Avoid any behavior that could be construed as criminal, regardless of your modern understanding of the law. Respect local customs, avoid conflict, and demonstrate appropriate deference to those in authority. Be cautious in your words and actions, and remember that even seemingly minor infractions can have severe consequences. However, if you do find yourself accused of a crime, your survival will depend on your ability to adapt and navigate the system. Knowing the local customs and laws is crucial. Understanding the social dynamics and the influence of local power brokers can be invaluable. If possible, try to secure the support of influential individuals who can intercede on your behalf. Remember, in a world governed by personal relationships and power dynamics, connections can be just as important, if not more so, than legal processes. Your understanding of medieval social structures could be the difference between survival and a gruesome end. Finally, remember that the medieval justice system was not just about punishment. It was also about maintaining social order and reinforcing the existing power structures. By understanding this dynamic, you can better anticipate potential dangers and navigate the legal landscape with a greater chance of survival. Your knowledge of history could be your greatest asset in this unpredictable and often brutal world. Remember, time travelers, your understanding of this system isn't just about avoiding trouble. It's about surviving it if you find yourself caught in its complex and often merciless web. So be vigilant, be cautious, and remember, in the medieval world, the law is often as unpredictable and unforgiving as the land itself. All right, time travelers, let's talk about something that drastically differs from our modern experience: travel and transportation in the medieval ages. Forget zipping across continents in hours. Forget comfortable, climate-controlled vehicles. Medieval journeys were long, arduous, dangerous, and often incredibly uncomfortable. Understanding the realities of medieval travel is crucial for your survival because a poorly planned trip could easily become your last. First, let's address the sheer length of journeys. Distances that seem manageable today were immense undertakings in the medieval world. Lack of reliable roads, coupled with the slow pace of travel, meant that even short distances could take days, or even weeks, to cover. A journey that might take us a few hours by car could easily take several days on horseback and even longer on foot. This dramatically impacts your planning. You need to factor in significantly more travel time than you're used to and prepare accordingly. The infrastructure itself was a major factor affecting travel. While some major roads existed, particularly those connecting important cities or religious sites, most travel routes were little more than rough tracks, often poorly maintained and susceptible to damage from weather and neglect. These tracks were often impassable in bad weather, forcing travelers to find alternative routes or delay their journeys. The condition of these roads varied dramatically from region to region, and even within the same region. Some areas might have well-maintained roads, while others might be little more than muddy trails. This meant that traveling required flexibility and adaptability, and the ability to improvise when faced with unexpected obstacles. The most common mode of transportation for most people was walking. This was by far the slowest and most strenuous method of travel, and it was only suitable for short distances. Long-distance travel on foot was arduous, time-consuming, and extremely physically demanding. Travelers often walked in groups for safety and companionship, and they would need to carry all their belongings with them. This limited the amount of supplies they could carry, making them vulnerable to exhaustion and starvation. For those who could afford it, horseback riding was a faster and more comfortable method of travel. Horses were essential for both personal travel and the transportation of goods. However, horseback riding was still slow and tiring, and it was not suitable for all types of terrain. Horses required care and attention, and they were susceptible to injury and disease, which could disrupt travel plans. The cost of owning and maintaining a horse was also significant, making it an option only for the wealthy or those traveling on official business. Carriages and wagons were used for transporting goods and people over longer distances. However, these were slow and cumbersome, and they were often susceptible to breakdowns. Travel by carriage was also expensive, making it inaccessible to the majority of the population. The journey itself was often uncomfortable, with bumpy roads and limited space inside the carriage. Carriages were also vulnerable to bandits and other dangers, adding another layer of risk to long-distance travel. Water travel was a significant mode of transportation in certain regions, particularly those with extensive river systems. Rivers provided a relatively efficient means of transporting goods and people, especially over long distances. However, river travel was also subject to the whims of nature. Flooding, low water levels, and storms could all disrupt travel plans. River travel could also be dangerous, with the risk of accidents, piracy, and disease. Ships and boats provided a more efficient way of transporting goods and people across larger bodies of water. However, sea travel was even more dangerous than river travel. Storms, pirates, and shipwrecks were constant threats. Sea voyages could take weeks or even months, and they were often arduous and uncomfortable. Regardless of the mode of transportation, medieval travel was fraught with danger. Bandits and highwaymen were a constant threat, preying on travelers and stealing their goods, or worse. Travelers also faced the risk of wild animals, disease, and accidents. The lack of reliable maps and the prevalence of poor weather conditions made navigation challenging and increased the likelihood of getting lost. The risk of disease was particularly high, with travelers often exposed to contaminated water and food and overcrowded conditions. Simple injuries could easily become infected, leading to serious complications. Planning a medieval journey required meticulous preparation. Travelers needed to obtain appropriate permits and letters of safe conduct, especially when crossing regional or national borders. They needed to gather sufficient supplies, including food, water, and clothing, to last the entire duration of their journey. They needed to plan their route carefully, taking into account the condition of the roads, the availability of lodging, and the potential dangers along the way. They would also need to be prepared for unexpected delays and disruptions. In the absence of reliable maps, travelers often relied on local guides or landmarks to navigate their way. This meant that journeys were often unpredictable and could take longer than anticipated. Travelers often relied on the hospitality of local communities for food and lodging. This meant that they were dependent on the goodwill of others, and they had to be mindful of local customs and traditions. Communication was also a major challenge. News traveled slowly, and travelers often had little or no way of knowing what conditions awaited them along their route. This made it difficult to plan ahead and could lead to unexpected delays or dangers. So, time travelers, if you plan to journey through the medieval world, understand that it's not a quick trip. It's a significant undertaking, requiring careful planning, meticulous preparation, and a healthy dose of resilience. Be prepared for long distances, harsh conditions, and the ever-present threat of danger. Understanding the realities of medieval travel is not just about getting from point A to point B. It's about surviving the journey itself. Your survival depends on it. Now, let's move on to the next critical aspect of navigating the medieval world. All right, time travelers, let's tackle some deeply ingrained misconceptions about the Middle Ages. Hollywood and popular culture have painted a rather inaccurate picture, perpetuating myths and stereotypes that need a serious dose of reality. We're going to debunk some of the most common fallacies, helping you navigate the real Middle Ages, not the fictionalized version. First, let's address the pervasive myth of the Dark Ages. This term, often used to describe the period following the fall of the Roman Empire, is a gross oversimplification and a historical inaccuracy. While it's true that the period saw significant societal upheaval and a decline in certain aspects of Roman civilization, to label it as dark is to ignore the considerable intellectual, artistic, and technological advancements that occurred. The Middle Ages witnessed the flourishing of Gothic architecture, the development of universities, significant advancements in agriculture, and the preservation and translation of classical texts. It was a period of innovation and adaptation, not a stagnant era of decline. The term Dark Ages itself is a product of the Renaissance, a later period that sought to contrast itself with what it perceived as a less sophisticated era. Another common misconception is the belief that everyone in the Middle Ages was illiterate. While literacy rates were lower than in modern times, and certainly lower among the peasantry, it's inaccurate to assume that everyone was unable to read or write. Literacy was more prevalent amongst the clergy, nobility, and the growing merchant class. Monasteries played a vital role in preserving and disseminating knowledge, and many individuals, even within the peasantry, possessed at least basic literacy skills. The idea of a completely illiterate populace is a significant exaggeration. Next, let's address the romanticized notion of medieval knights as chivalrous heroes. While chivalry existed as a code of conduct, particularly amongst the nobility, it was far from universally practiced. Knights were often brutal warriors, engaged in violence and warfare, and the idealized image of a noble knight upholding justice and protecting the weak is often at odds with historical reality. Chivalry was more of an aspirational ideal than a consistently followed code. The reality was frequently far more brutal, involving violence, power struggles, and self-interest. The idea of a uniformly dirty and disease-ridden medieval world is another common misconception. While hygiene standards were undoubtedly lower than in modern times, and disease was a significant threat, it wasn't a universally filthy society. Cleanliness varied significantly depending on social class and geographical location. The wealthy had access to better sanitation and hygiene practices than the poor, and some urban centers had surprisingly sophisticated sanitation systems for their time. The idea of a universally dirty medieval world is an oversimplification that ignores regional and class variations. The notion that medieval people were uniformly superstitious and fearful of magic is also overly simplistic. While superstition was undoubtedly prevalent and belief in magic and supernatural forces was widespread, it's inaccurate to assume that everyone was equally superstitious or that all belief systems were irrational. Medieval people held a range of beliefs, and their understanding of the world was often a complex blend of religious doctrine, folk beliefs, and practical experience. The idea of a uniformly superstitious populace ignores the diversity of beliefs and practices across different groups and regions. The myth of the medieval peasant as a downtrodden, perpetually starving individual is another misconception that requires correction. While peasant life was undoubtedly harsh and periods of famine were common, it's inaccurate to assume that peasants were constantly starving or living in abject poverty. The reality was far more complex, with varying levels of prosperity and hardship depending on factors like location, climate, and the generosity, or lack thereof, of their landlords. Many peasants owned small plots of land and enjoyed a degree of economic independence, while others were landless laborers, working for wages. The experience of being a peasant varied significantly, depending on circumstances. The concept of a static, unchanging medieval world is also misleading. The Middle Ages were a dynamic period of significant change and evolution, not a static era frozen in time. Technological advancements, social shifts, political upheavals, and religious reformations all shaped the medieval world, and it's inaccurate to view it as a monolithic, unchanging entity. It was a period of constant flux, with significant variations across regions and time periods. Finally, the idea that the Middle Ages were a completely homogeneous era is a significant oversimplification. The medieval period spanned centuries and encompassed a vast geographical area, with significant cultural, linguistic, and political diversity. Generalizing about the medieval experience is like generalizing about the modern experience. It's too vast and varied. The experiences of people living in 11th century England were vastly different from those of people living in 15th century Italy, and even within the same region, significant variations existed depending on social class, geography, and individual circumstances. So, time travelers, as you prepare for your journey into the past, remember that the Middle Ages were far more complex and nuanced than popular culture often portrays. By understanding these common misconceptions and embracing the historical complexity of the period, you'll be better equipped to navigate this fascinating, yet often misunderstood, era. Don't fall into the trap of accepting simplistic narratives. Delve into the rich tapestry of history and gain a more accurate and informed perspective. Remember, accurate historical understanding is vital for a successful and safe time travel adventure. Now, let's move on to another crucial aspect of your survival guide. All right, time travelers, we've covered a lot of ground so far. Language, clothing, hygiene, food, social etiquette, religion, and the often brutal realities of medieval law and order. But even with all that knowledge, your survival in the medieval world will depend heavily on your practical skills. This isn't a museum visit. This is a journey into a time where basic survival skills could be the difference between life and death. We're talking about skills that were essential for daily life in the medieval period, skills that could mean the difference between thriving and perishing. Let's start with foraging. In a world without supermarkets and readily available food, knowing how to identify edible plants and fungi was a matter of life and death. This isn't just about finding berries and nuts. It's about knowing which plants are safe to consume and which are poisonous. A single mistake could have fatal consequences. Many medieval people relied on foraging to supplement their diet, especially during times of scarcity. Learning to identify edible plants and fungi requires careful study and practice. There are numerous resources available today, both online and in print, that can teach you about the edible plants and fungi of different regions. However, it's crucial to remember that relying solely on these resources isn't enough. You need to supplement this knowledge with practical experience, preferably under the guidance of an expert. Remember, misidentification can be lethal. Don't experiment. Be certain of your identification before consuming any wild plants or fungi. Knowledge of foraging techniques, identifying edible plants, understanding seasonal availability, and harvesting responsibly is a crucial skill to have. Next, let's talk about fire making. Fire was essential for cooking food, providing warmth, and protecting against predators. In the medieval world, fire making wasn't as simple as flicking a lighter. It required skill, patience, and a thorough understanding of fire-starting techniques. You'll need to know how to create tinder, gather kindling, and build a structure that will sustain a flame. This involves understanding the properties of different materials and how to arrange them to create a successful fire. Practice various fire-starting techniques before you go. Mastering the art of fire starting with traditional methods, such as using flint and steel or a bow drill, is an invaluable skill. Remember, fire is a powerful tool, and mishandling it can lead to disastrous consequences. Learn proper fire safety techniques, know how to extinguish a fire, and understand the risks associated with uncontrolled fires. Now let's discuss first aid. In a world without modern medicine, even minor injuries could quickly become life-threatening. Knowing basic first aid techniques could be the difference between life and death. This includes knowing how to clean and dress wounds, stop bleeding, and treat common injuries. You'll need to learn how to identify and treat infections, which were a major cause of death in the medieval period. Herbal remedies were often used to treat illnesses and injuries. While some herbal remedies were effective, others were ineffective or even harmful. Knowledge of basic herbal remedies can be helpful, but it's essential to proceed with caution and avoid experimenting with unfamiliar plants. Remember, safety and caution are paramount when it comes to treating injuries and illnesses. Improper treatment could worsen a condition and even lead to death. Researching common medieval medical practices and understanding the limitations of medieval medicine is crucial. Beyond these core skills, consider other practical abilities. Basic carpentry skills could prove invaluable for building shelter or repairing tools. Knowledge of animal husbandry could provide you with a source of food and transportation. Understanding basic agricultural practices would allow you to contribute to food production. These skills, although seemingly simple in our modern context, were essential for survival in the medieval world. In a society where self-reliance was paramount, possessing these practical skills would significantly enhance your chances of survival. Remember, time travelers, this isn't about becoming a medieval survival expert overnight. It's about acquiring the fundamental skills that would have been essential for daily life in the medieval period. These skills are not merely theoretical, they're practical and could directly impact your safety and well-being. The more skills you possess, the better equipped you'll be to adapt to the challenges of the medieval world. Start practicing these skills now. The time you invest in learning these fundamental techniques will be invaluable when you find yourself facing the harsh realities of medieval life. Don't underestimate the importance of practical skills. In a world without readily available resources and sophisticated medical care, your ability to provide for yourself could be the difference between a successful time travel adventure and a very unfortunate return. So, start practicing these skills today. Your life might depend on it. We've covered a lot of theoretical knowledge, but now it's time to put that knowledge into practice. These are not just skills, they are your survival tools. Master them, and you'll be better prepared for the challenges that lie ahead. Remember, time travelers, preparedness is key to survival. The more skills you have, the better your chances of thriving, not just surviving, in this fascinating yet unforgiving era. So, start practicing and good luck. All right, time travelers, we've covered a lot of ground, but let's address a particularly insidious threat in the medieval world: accusations of witchcraft or heresy. These weren't mere misunderstandings. They were often death sentences, fueled by fear, superstition, and the immense power of the Church. Avoiding these accusations is absolutely crucial for your survival. We're not just talking about avoiding obvious displays of witchcraft. We're talking about understanding the social and cultural context that led to these accusations and how to navigate that context safely. First, let's understand the climate of fear. The medieval world was deeply religious, with a strong emphasis on the power of God and the ever-present threat of the devil. Disease, famine, natural disasters, anything unexplained was often attributed to supernatural forces, and those perceived as wielding such forces, either for good or ill, were often viewed with suspicion and fear. Accusations of witchcraft were particularly common against women, often targeting those who were independent, outspoken, or who possessed knowledge or skills that set them apart. This could include herbalists, midwives, healers, or simply women who were perceived as different or unconventional. Remember, the line between healer and witch was often blurred, and possessing knowledge of herbal remedies or healing techniques could easily be misinterpreted as witchcraft. Even seemingly innocent actions, such as possessing unusual knowledge of plants or animals, could be twisted into evidence of a pact with the devil. If you possess any medical or herbal knowledge from your time, keep it extremely discreet. Do not openly display any knowledge of practices that are unfamiliar to the medieval population. Common accusations included causing illness or livestock deaths, cursing people or their property, engaging in nocturnal gatherings, using charms or spells, or simply possessing unusual behavior or appearance. The very act of being different, of not conforming to societal norms, could make you a target. Remember, conformity was key in this society. Don't stand out. Blend in as much as possible. Accusations of heresy were equally dangerous, targeting anyone whose beliefs or practices deviated from established religious doctrine. This could include holding unorthodox theological views, questioning church authority, or simply failing to adhere strictly to religious customs and practices. Even subtle disagreements with the Church's teachings or a lack of fervent religious expression could be enough to attract suspicion. If you are a person of faith, it is vital to appear devout and observant. Attend church services regularly, Participate in religious rituals appropriately, and avoid expressing any beliefs or opinions that could be construed as heretical. Remember, outward displays of piety are crucial, even if your inner beliefs differ from those of the dominant religion. Conformity is your shield against suspicion. Avoid expressing any skepticism or doubt regarding religious dogma. Challenging established beliefs, even in private conversation, could have severe consequences. Remember, the very act of questioning authority could be interpreted as heresy. Be cautious in your conversations and avoid any discussions that could be overheard and misinterpreted. Remember, your words can be used against you. Avoid any behavior that could be interpreted as supernatural or magical. This includes anything that deviates from the norm. Even seemingly harmless practices, such as using certain herbs or engaging in unusual rituals, could be twisted into evidence of witchcraft. If you are skilled in any craft or trade, be careful not to display your skills in a way that might attract unwanted attention. Remember, exceptional skills can be viewed with suspicion and fear. If you are accused of witchcraft or heresy, your chances of survival are slim. The legal processes were often unfair, with little regard for evidence or due process. Torture was commonly used to extract confessions, and even if you maintain your innocence, the burden of proof lies with you. Remember, a confession, regardless of its validity, was often enough to secure a conviction. If you are accused, try to secure the support of influential individuals who can intercede on your behalf. Connections and social standing are vital in these situations. If you have established relationships with people of influence, use these connections to your advantage. Remember, navigating the medieval world requires social intelligence and the ability to leverage relationships. Finally, understand that avoiding accusations of witchcraft or heresy requires more than just avoiding obvious displays of magic or unconventional beliefs. It requires understanding the social and cultural context, conforming to societal norms, and demonstrating unwavering piety. Remember, in a world governed by fear and superstition, appearances can be just as important as reality. Your survival depends on it. So, time travelers, be vigilant, be discreet, and remember, blending in is your best defense against the ever-present threat of accusations of witchcraft or heresy. Your life may depend on it. Now, let's move on to the next critical aspect of your survival guide. All right, time travelers, let's face it, even with meticulous planning and preparation, things can go wrong. The medieval world was a dangerous place, and even the most cautious among us might find themselves in a perilous situation. So, let's discuss strategies for escaping trouble and what to do if you find yourself accused of a crime. This isn't about wishing for a magical escape. It's about practical strategies that could increase your chances of survival. First, let's address escaping dangerous situations. This could range from a simple brawl to a more serious encounter with bandits or a hostile mob. Your immediate priority is to assess the situation and determine the level of danger. If you can safely retreat, do so immediately. Don't be a hero. Prioritize your survival. Blend into the crowd, move quickly and discreetly, and try to reach a safe location as quickly as possible. Remember, your knowledge of the local area, gained through your research, will be invaluable in this situation. Knowing escape routes and safe havens could be the difference between life and death. If a direct confrontation is unavoidable, your best strategy is to de-escalate the situation. Avoid aggressive behavior, speak calmly and respectfully, and try to reason with your adversaries. If possible, offer a conciliatory gesture, such as offering a small gift or apologizing for any perceived offense. Remember, your understanding of medieval social etiquette will be crucial here. Knowing how to address people appropriately, showing deference to those of higher social standing, and avoiding any behavior that could be interpreted as disrespectful can significantly reduce the risk of violence. If physical violence is unavoidable, your chances of survival depend on your ability to defend yourself. While you might not have access to modern weaponry, you can use your knowledge of medieval combat techniques, gleaned from your research, to your advantage. Remember, your goal is not to win a fight, it's to survive. Strike quickly and decisively, aiming for vulnerable areas, and try to escape as soon as possible. Your physical fitness and ability to fight effectively will be crucial, so maintain your physical health before and during your time travel. Now, let's address the far more complex situation of being accused of a crime. This could range from a minor infraction to a serious felony, such as theft, assault, or even heresy. The consequences of a criminal accusation in the medieval world could be severe, often leading to imprisonment, torture, or execution. Your approach will depend on the nature of the accusation and your social standing. If the accusation is minor, such as a petty theft or a minor assault, your best strategy might be to offer a sincere apology and make amends. This might involve paying a fine, offering restitution to the victim, or performing some form of community service. Remember, demonstrating contrition and showing respect for local customs can go a long way toward mitigating the consequences. Your understanding of medieval social dynamics will be crucial. Leveraging your connections and social standing can be invaluable in navigating the legal system. If the accusation is more serious, such as a felony or an accusation of heresy, your chances of survival are significantly lower. The medieval justice system was often arbitrary and brutal, with little regard for due process or fair trials. Accusations, especially those involving serious crimes or religious offenses, were often taken very seriously and could easily lead to imprisonment, torture, or execution. Your best strategy in this situation is to secure the support of influential individuals who can intercede on your behalf. This might involve seeking the help of powerful nobles, clergy members, or other individuals who hold influence within the community. Your prior research into the social dynamics and power structures of your target region will be invaluable here. Knowing who holds power and influence and cultivating relationships with these individuals before you find yourself in trouble could be the difference between life and death. If you are arrested, your chances of survival will depend heavily on your ability to withstand interrogation. Remember, torture was commonly used to extract confessions, regardless of the accused's actual guilt. If you are subjected to torture, your best strategy is to resist as long as possible while carefully choosing your words. A false confession, even if obtained through torture, could lead to a swift and brutal execution. Your ability to endure physical and psychological suffering will be tested to its limits. Mental and physical preparedness is crucial. If you are found guilty, your punishment will depend on the severity of the crime, the social standing of both the accused and the victim, and the whims of those in power. Imprisonment was a common punishment, but the conditions of imprisonment varied greatly, ranging from relatively comfortable confinement to brutal and unsanitary conditions. Execution was also a common punishment for serious crimes, with the methods of execution varying widely depending on the region and the nature of the crime. Even if you managed to escape imprisonment or execution, remember that the medieval world was a society governed by power and influence. Social standing played a significant role in determining your fate, and your ability to navigate the complexities of medieval social dynamics could determine your survival. Your knowledge of the social hierarchies, customs, and power structures of your target region will be invaluable. Remember, time travelers, this isn't a game. The medieval world was a dangerous place, and your survival depends on your ability to assess risk, adapt to changing circumstances, and leverage your knowledge and skills to navigate the treacherous landscape of this era. Thorough preparation, quick thinking, and a healthy dose of resilience are your greatest assets. Be prepared for the worst, hope for the best, and remember, your survival depends on your ability to adapt and overcome. Good luck, time travelers. You'll need it. So there you have it, time travelers. Your crash course in surviving the Middle Ages, a period far more complex and challenging than Hollywood would have you believe. We've journeyed through the intricacies of medieval life, from the seemingly simple act of communication to the life-or-death stakes of navigating social hierarchies and the unpredictable justice system. We've explored the harsh realities of daily life, the ever-present threat of disease, and the importance of practical skills in a world without modern conveniences. You've learned about the importance of blending in, understanding the nuances of social etiquette, and the critical role religion played in shaping every aspect of medieval society. Hopefully, you now possess a deeper understanding of this fascinating, yet unforgiving, era, equipping you with the knowledge to navigate its treacherous landscape. But let's be clear, This isn't a game. This isn't a historical reenactment. This is a potential journey into a world where a single misstep could have fatal consequences. The information we've covered today is not a guarantee of survival, but rather a set of tools, a toolkit for navigating the complexities and dangers of medieval life. Your success will depend entirely on your preparation, your adaptability, and your ability to think critically and act decisively when faced with unexpected challenges. Remember, the key to survival is meticulous preparation. This isn't something you can wing. It requires dedication, research, and a profound understanding of the historical context. You've learned about the importance of language acquisition. Mastering at least the basics of the local vernacular, along with a working knowledge of Latin, will be absolutely crucial for effective communication. We've stressed the necessity of appropriate attire, blending seamlessly into the background, avoiding anything that screams outsider, is paramount to avoiding suspicion and potential conflict. Your understanding of medieval hygiene practices, or rather, the lack thereof, will be vital to your health and well-being. The prevalence of disease was staggering, and understanding basic sanitation practices, or the lack thereof, and implementing preventative measures is critical to avoiding illness. We've covered the realities of the medieval diet, emphasizing the importance of food safety and the need to avoid anything that looks or smells questionable. Remember, food poisoning could easily become a death sentence in a world without modern medicine. Navigating the complex social structures of medieval society requires a keen understanding of etiquette and the rigid social hierarchy. Knowing your place, demonstrating appropriate deference to those of higher social standing, and avoiding any behavior that could be interpreted as disrespectful is non-negotiable. A simple social blunder could have devastating consequences, potentially leading to conflict or accusations that could jeopardize your survival. Your understanding of the dominant faith and its practices is equally crucial. Religion permeated every aspect of medieval life, and failing to demonstrate respect or inadvertently violating religious customs could lead to suspicion, accusations of heresy, and potentially fatal consequences. Remember, the line between acceptable and unacceptable behavior was often blurred, and the consequences of crossing that line could be severe. We've examined the often brutal and unpredictable medieval justice system, a far cry from the modern legal systems we're familiar with. Avoiding crime is obviously the best strategy, but understanding how the system functioned and the potential for arbitrary punishments is essential. Knowing how to navigate the system, even if you find yourself on the wrong side of the law, could be the difference between survival and a gruesome end. We've discussed the realities of medieval travel, long, arduous journeys fraught with danger. Understanding the limitations of transportation, the dangers of the road, and the need for meticulous planning is paramount. A poorly planned journey could easily become your last. We also explored the importance of practical skills, foraging, firemaking, and first aid, skills that were essential for daily life and could mean the difference between life and death. These aren't just historical curiosities, they are vital survival tools in a world without modern conveniences. The more skills you possess, the better equipped you will be to handle the challenges and uncertainties of medieval life. Finally, we address the ever-present threat of accusations of witchcraft or heresy, focusing on the importance of blending in, avoiding anything that could be construed as unconventional or suspicious, and demonstrating unwavering piety, even if your personal beliefs differ. These accusations were often death sentences, and avoiding them requires careful consideration and a deep understanding of the social and cultural context. So, as you contemplate your time travel adventure, remember this: preparation is key. Don't just jump in blindly. Take the time to thoroughly research your destination, understand the nuances of the culture, and acquire the necessary skills. Your survival will depend on your ability to adapt, to think critically, and to act decisively when faced with unexpected challenges. This isn't a game, it's a potential journey into a world where the stakes were literally life or death. This video has provided a framework, a starting point for your preparations. But it is crucial to remember that this is just a glimpse into the vast complexities of the medieval world. Further research is essential. Delve deeper into the specifics of your chosen time period and region. Consult historical texts, archaeological findings, and scholarly works to gain a more comprehensive understanding of the challenges and opportunities that await you. This isn't about memorizing facts. It's about cultivating a mindset of critical thinking, adaptability, and resourcefulness. Remember the importance of empathy and respect. While the medieval world was undoubtedly harsh, it was also a time of rich culture, innovation, and human resilience. Approach your journey with a sense of respect for the people who lived during that era, recognizing the challenges they faced and the remarkable ways they navigated the complexities of their world. Finally, good luck, time travelers. Your journey into the past is a momentous undertaking, fraught with potential dangers and uncertainties. But with careful planning, meticulous preparation, and a healthy dose of courage and resilience, you might just survive, and perhaps even thrive, in this fascinating yet unforgiving era. Now go forth, armed with knowledge, and may your time travel adventure be a successful one. And remember, the most important rule of time travel is always come back.